Welcome to This Explainer. Look, we're going to challenge pretty much everything you thought you knew about the end of Prohibition today. Most history books point to a big shift in public morals, but we're going to pull back the curtain and reveal the hidden economic machinery that essentially forced the government's hand and literally changed the U.S. Constitution.
All right, let's just dive right in. Why did Prohibition actually end in 1933? I mean, sure, everyone assumes Americans were just thirsty, or maybe they were completely sick of the crime waves brought on by mobsters like Al Capone. But the real truth? It's actually buried deep in the U.S. Treasury. It wasn't just about drinking. It was all about dollars.
The absolute crucial piece of the puzzle is this number right here, 64%. That is exactly how much federal income tax revenue plummeted between 1930 and 1933. The Great Depression was just decimating both corporate and individual incomes, and the government was staring down a complete financial abyss.
Let's move into Section 1, the Great Revenue Collapse. We're looking at how a moral crusade turned into an absolute fiscal crisis.
You know, before the income tax was even created in 1913 via the 16th Amendment, alcohol taxes actually funded up to 40% of the entire federal budget. Think about that for a second. Prohibition was literally only financially possible in 1920 because the brand new income tax was there to temporarily replace that massive liquor revenue. The government thought they were sitting on a safe, new revenue stream.
But wow, did that new setup collapse incredibly fast? As the Great Depression wiped out everyday incomes across the country, income tax receipts dropped by over a third in 1932 alone. By 1933, they were less than 2/5 of what they were just 3 years prior. The supposedly safe revenue stream was completely drying up.
The government was essentially going broke. There's this fantastic quote from a prominent House leader in 1934 that really hits the nail on the head. He pointed out that repeal meant desperately needed revenue, and admitted that without it, the dry era would have likely dragged on for at least another 10 years. It wasn't a sudden change of heart, it was a pure emergency fiscal solution.
Moving on to Section 2, the 3.2% loophole, officially known as the Cullen-Harrison Act of 1933. So, picture this. It's March 1933. Prohibition hasn't even been officially repealed yet, but FDR signs the Cullen-Harrison Act. It was famously pushed through as a revenue act. They creatively legalized the sale of beer and wine with a 3.2% alcohol content by weight by officially declaring them non-intoxicating. It was a completely brilliant legislative loophole designed to instantly bypass the Volstead Act and start collecting taxes right away.
And right as he's signing this bill to unlock that desperately needed cash flow, President Roosevelt actually quips, "I think this would be a good time for a beer." It injected a bit of much-needed humor into a really heavy economic situation. But make no mistake here, the true celebration in Washington was all about the incoming tax dollars, not the drinks themselves.
Section 3. Ratifying the 21st Amendment. Let's look at this rapid constitutional reversal.
Think about how lightning fast this whole process was in 1933. In February, Congress proposes the 21st Amendment. By April, that 3.2% beer is already generating legal tax revenue, and by December, Utah becomes the 36th state to ratify. To hit that kind of speed, they bypass the usual sluggish legislative hurdles by utilizing state conventions instead of state legislatures to lock in that three-quarters ratification. Economics demanded absolute urgency.
Section 4. The three-tiered system, or how the government worked on preventing the return of the quote-unquote old-time saloon.
Okay, so before 1920, brewers had this massive grip on retail saloons through things called tied houses. Basically, the manufacturer owned the bar outright. But post-1933, the newly formed Federal Alcohol Control Administration stepped in to institute a strict separation of powers. They were absolutely terrified of monopolies returning and bringing back the social issues associated with them.
So they established what we now know as the three-tiered system. Step 1, the manufacturer. Step 2, the wholesaler. And Step 3, the retailer. They mandated that manufacturers simply could not provide goods on consignment, they couldn't hold retail licenses, and they couldn't pump money into the retailers where the drinks were actually consumed. This strict separation completely reshaped the industry, and honestly, it remains the backbone of alcohol distribution even today.
This set up a really rigid public-private partnership. It granted individual states their own oversight jurisdictions, meaning, hey, if a state still wanted to stay dry, they could. Meanwhile, the federal government maintained tight control over distilling capacity and issued the operating permits. This whole framework was specifically designed to keep criminal elements totally out of the legalized industry and, of course, keep a tight grip on the tax pipeline.
And that brings us to Section 5, the economic aftermath, and how this ultimately funded the recovery.
The financial turnaround here was just spectacular. Liquor tax revenues exploded from a tiny 2% of federal revenues in 1933 to 9% the very next year, and climbed all the way up to 13% by 1936. The government rapidly plugged that massive hole in their budget that the Great Depression had blown through income taxes.
And it wasn't just the government cashing in. The private sector went wild too. Get this, a diversified group of alcohol stocks yielded a staggering 365% return just between February and August of 1933 alone. It was an absolute gold rush for these newly legitimized markets, driven by the new regulatory stability and, obviously, a ton of pent-up consumer demand.
So what's the ultimate takeaway from this explainer? Is that those millions of dollars collected in new alcohol taxes provided the exact essential funding required to finance FDR's New Deal programs. Prohibition didn't just end because folks wanted a drink on a Friday night. It ended because the government desperately needed the money to put jobless Americans back to work. Alcohol, literally, helped fund the economic recovery. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to really think about. If severe economic desperation was the real catalyst for ending a massive moral crusade like Prohibition, what current laws today are shaped way more by the need for tax revenue than by genuine moral conviction? It's a pretty fascinating lens to view our modern legislation through. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and remember to keep questioning the structures behind the history you think you know.